Welcome back to your own English Spark, my beautiful people. As you know, stories are the best source to improve your English. So I am back with an amazing story. It was a rainy September morning when Sophie's life changed forever. She was 26, a passionate writer struggling to finish her first novel, spending most days at Riverside Cafe near Boston University. The cafe had become her sanctuary, with its warm lighting and the constant hum of conversations that helped her think. That morning, she was lost in her laptop, typing furiously, when someone bumped into her table. Hot coffee spilled across her keyboard. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The voice belonged to Ethan, a 28-year-old photographer who had been backing up to get a better angle of the rain-soaked streets of Cambridge outside. Sophie looked up, ready to be angry, but the genuine panic in his eyes stopped her. He was already grabbing napkins, trying to save her laptop. "Is it ruined?" "Please tell me you had it backed up," Ethan said, his camera still hanging around his neck. Sophie couldn't help but smile at his frantic energy. "It's okay. I save obsessively. Occupational hazard of being a writer." "A writer? What do you write?" Ethan asked, still dabbing at the coffee. "Stories about people who don't spill coffee on strangers' laptops," she replied, with a smirk. He laughed, a genuine sound that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Fair enough. Let me buy you a new coffee. And maybe a new laptop if this one doesn't survive." They talked for 3 hours that day. Ethan showed her his photography, images that captured raw human emotion in everyday moments. Sophie shared passages from her unfinished novel. They discovered they both loved classic rock, believed that autumn in New England was the most romantic season, and had the same favorite book, The Great Gatsby. Before leaving, Ethan took a candid photo of Sophie by the window, raindrops creating patterns on the glass behind her. "For my collection of beautiful accidents," he said softly. Over the next 2 months, Sophie and Ethan became inseparable. Their connection was effortless, like they'd known each other across lifetimes. Ethan would surprise her at the cafe with her favorite pastries from Mike's Bakery in the North End. Sophie would send him midnight texts with story ideas inspired by his photographs. Their first official date was at the Museum of Fine Arts. Ethan held her hand as they walked through the gallery, explaining the technical aspects, while Sophie interpreted the emotional stories behind each image. When they reached a photograph of an empty bench in Central Park during winter, Sophie whispered, "That's loneliness captured in one frame." Ethan squeezed her hand. "I don't feel lonely anymore." They had their first kiss that night, standing under a streetlight in the rain on Newbury Street, just like a scene from the movies Sophie loved. It was gentle, tentative, perfect. For Sophie's birthday in November, Ethan created something special. He had compiled all the candid photographs he'd taken of her over the past 2 months, creating a photo book titled Sophie Unfiltered. Each picture showed her in moments she hadn't known she was being captured. In her laughter, her concentration, her quiet contemplation. The last page had a photograph of them together, reflected in a cafe window, and beneath it, he'd written, "The day I stopped taking pictures of moments and started living in them." Sophie cried happy tears and kissed him deeply. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," Ethan replied, more than I knew was possible. As winter arrived, their relationship deepened. They began talking about the future with certainty rather than possibility. Ethan wanted to open his own photography studio. Sophie had finally found the ending to her novel, and publishers were showing interest. One December evening, they sat in Ethan's small apartment in Alston, surrounded by his photographs and her manuscript pages. The Boston skyline twinkled outside as snow began to fall. "What if we traveled together?" Ethan suggested, tracing patterns on her palm. "I could do travel photography. You could write about the places we visit. We could see the world." Sophie's eyes lit up. The Pacific Northwest first. Then maybe California, Europe. "Everywhere," Ethan finished. "We'll go everywhere." They made lists that night, planning an adventure that felt both exciting and inevitable. They talked about the small brownstone they'd buy someday in Beacon Hill, with a studio for him and a writing room for her. They even joked about names for the children they might have far in the future. 2 kids, Sophie decided, a boy and a girl. "And a dog," Ethan added, "a big clumsy golden retriever that knocks things over." "Just like you knocked over my coffee," Sophie laughed. "Best accident of my life," he said, pulling her close. Everything felt possible. Everything felt perfect. In January, Ethan received news that changed everything. His father had suffered a massive stroke back in his hometown of Portland, Oregon. His mother, Patricia, called in tears, begging him to come home. His father needed care, and Ethan was the eldest son. "It's temporary," Ethan told Sophie as he packed. "Just until Dad recovers. Maybe a few months." Sophie helped him pack, trying to be supportive while her heart sank. "I'll visit every weekend I can," she promised. "We'll make it work," Ethan assured her, kissing her forehead. "Nothing can change what we have. But distance has a way of changing everything." At first, they video called every night. But Ethan's father's condition was worse than expected. The stroke had left him partially paralyzed, needing constant care. Ethan's mother couldn't handle it alone, and there was no money for full-time help. Sophie tried to understand, burying herself in editing her novel, but the loneliness crept in. "When are you coming back?" she'd ask during their brief conversations. "I don't know, Sophie. Dad's not improving. Mom needs me here," Ethan would reply, his voice heavy with guilt and exhaustion. "What about us? What about our plans?" "I haven't forgotten. Please just give me time." But time became their enemy. Weeks turned into months. By March, the strain was undeniable. Sophie's novel had been accepted by Penguin Random House, a dream come true. But when she called Ethan with the news, he was distracted, barely registering her excitement. "That's amazing, Sophie. Listen, I have to go. Dad has a doctor's appointment." She hung up feeling hollow. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Ethan, meanwhile, was drowning in responsibility. His father's recovery had plateaued, his mother was depressed, and the family's financial situation was becoming desperate. His photography work had dried up. He felt trapped in a life he hadn't chosen, watching his dreams slip away. When they did talk, conversations turned into arguments. "You're not even trying to come back," Sophie accused during one painful call. "You think I want to be here? You think this is easy for me?" Ethan shot back. "Then come back. We can figure this out together." "How, Sophie? How do I leave my parents when they need me? Would you leave your family?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. In April, Sophie made the cross-country flight to Portland. She wanted to see Ethan to fix whatever was breaking between them. But when she arrived, the man she found was different. He was exhausted, shoulders bent under invisible weight, his eyes lacking their familiar spark. They barely had time alone. His mother needed help with his father. There were medical bills to discuss, medicines to organize. Sophie felt like an outsider in his life, watching from the periphery of his real responsibilities. That night, lying next to each other in his childhood bedroom in the suburbs of Beaverton, they felt miles apart. "I can't do this anymore," Sophie whispered in the darkness. Ethan's voice was barely audible. "What are you saying? This, us. It's not working. You're here. I'm there. You have your family obligations. I have my career taking off. We're living separate lives. So you want to give up?" There was pain in his voice, but also resignation. "I don't want to, but I can't keep waiting for a life that might never happen. And you can't abandon your family. We're stuck, Ethan." He reached for her hand in the darkness. "I love you. That hasn't changed." "I know." Sophie's voice cracked. "I love you too. But sometimes love isn't enough, is it?" The truth of those words shattered something between them. They held each other that night, both knowing it was goodbye, even if neither could say it yet. Sophie returned to Boston the next morning. They promised to stay in touch, to figure things out. But both knew they were just postponing the inevitable. Over the next month, their communication faded to occasional texts. Ethan's father was moved to a long-term care facility in Lake Oswego, but by then, the damage was done. The spark between them had dimmed under the weight of reality. In May, they had their last real conversation. It was brief, civil, heartbreaking. "I think we need to accept that this isn't going to work," Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. "I know," Ethan replied. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed. You were everything I needed. Life just got in the way." "I'll always love you, Sophie." "You know that, right?" "I know. I'll always love you too. But we have to let go." And just like that, it was over. The months after were harder than Sophie expected. Her novel was published in July to modest success, but every achievement felt hollow without Ethan to share it with. She'd reach for her phone to call him, then remember. She'd see something beautiful and think, Ethan would love to photograph this, and the loss would hit her all over again. She went back to Riverside Cafe, sitting at the same table where they'd met, writing in her journal instead of her laptop. The cafe owner, Mrs. Chen, noticed her sadness. Heartbreak? The older woman asked gently, setting down a cup of tea. Sophie nodded. The worst kind. The kind where nobody did anything wrong. Those are the hardest, Mrs. Chen said wisely, because there's no one to be angry at except life itself. Sophie learned to fill her days with work, friends, and new experiences. She adopted a cat named Fitzgerald, started taking yoga classes in Back Bay, traveled to Martha's Vineyard with her sister Rachel. Slowly, the sharp edges of pain dulled to a persistent ache. Ethan, too, was rebuilding. His father eventually stabilized enough to remain in the care facility. Ethan returned to photography, though his work had changed, darker, more introspective. He dated briefly, but found no connection that matched what he'd had with Sophie. 10 years passed. Sophie was 36 now, working on her fourth novel. She had learned to be happy again, though a part of her heart remained in that rainy cafe with a clumsy photographer who'd changed her life. One September morning, exactly 3 years after they'd met, Sophie walked into Riverside Cafe and stopped in her tracks. There was a photography exhibition on the wall, a local artist series Mrs. Chen had been hosting. The photographs were Ethan's. Sophie moved through the collection, her heart pounding. There were images from Portland, portraits of his parents, landscapes of the Columbia River Gorge. And then she saw it. The photograph of her by the window on that rainy first day, titled Beautiful Accidents. He dropped it off last week, Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside her. He's back in Boston? Opened a small studio near Harvard Square. Sophie stared at her own image, captured in a moment of perfect happiness she hadn't known she was living. She pulled out her phone, Ethan's number still saved, and typed a message. I saw the exhibition. The photos are beautiful. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, thank you. Some moments deserve to be remembered, even if they're in the past. Sophie's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to suggest coffee, to see him, to find out if any spark remained. But she stopped herself. Some stories aren't meant to have neat endings. Some loves remain incomplete. Beautiful, precisely because they were never forced into shapes they couldn't hold. She typed, they were the best moments of my life. I hope you're well. You too, Sophie. I mean that. She put her phone away and sat at her old table. Opening her laptop, she began to write. Not about them exactly, but about the beautiful, terrible truth she'd learned. That love doesn't always conquer all. That timing matters as much as feeling. That sometimes the right person comes at the wrong time. Outside, rain began to fall, just like that first day. Sophie smiled through her tears, grateful for what they'd had, accepting what they'd lost. Her incomplete love story had taught her the most important lesson. Some chapters end not because the story was bad, but because it was meant to remain unfinished, preserved forever in the amber of memory, perfect and untouched by the compromises that might have diminished it. As she typed the final words of her new novel, Sophie realized Ethan was right about one thing. The best photographs Like the best love stories, capture a single perfect moment and let it exist eternally, unchanged and unchanging. Sometimes incomplete is the only way a story can remain perfect. Should Sophie and Ethan reunite? Should they complete their love story? Tell me in the comments.